Yo, what is up guys, Grim here, and in today's video we're going to be talking about the reworked Beyond and how profitable it is in the new patch. So of course, everyone's been making fun of Beyond. It's the laughing stock. Everyone says it's way worse, and it's true. It's a shadow of its former self. But what if that shadow still had potential? Some big potential to make you some currency. That's what I wanted to find out, and we've put in the time, we've done the science, and we did a massive test over on stream. We've got the data. Let's dive into it. So Beyond obviously retains its identity of spawning Beyond monsters from portals, which is great. They drop all the usual loot you'd expect, but now they also drop Scourged currency, which is tainted currencies, which can be worth quite a significant amount, which we'll get into in a little bit here. Now, the other rework to Beyond though is that it no longer spawns an infinite amount of unique bosses. After you spawn a single unique boss, the event will end. You will spawn no more Beyond monsters after that unique boss spawns. However, the consolation prize is that that unique boss will spawn and, give you some guaranteed tainted currency, which can be worth quite a bit of currency. Now, when this boss spawns is completely random. You may spawn it on the very first pack you slay of Beyond monsters, or you may spawn it not at all. You can fully clear your insanely juiced map and not spawn it. And that's how it goes. Now, overall, I will say the majority of tainted currency you are going to drop in a map is going to pretty much be a 50-50 breakdown. You're going to drop probably half of it from the boss and half of it from the map, with some outliers giving you way more from maps where the boss does not spawn. That's been my experience overall, and I would say probably it's a little bit more from the monsters than the boss, depending on how it kind of goes. Now, that's not a bad thing overall, and I think it's completely fine. Now, the big thing that we need to discuss though is the profitability of this thing, because you get a ton of tainted currencies. Now, in order to determine this, we of course had to dive in and test it in multiple different scenarios. So first of all, the best case scenario, underground sea. Beyond is known as a mechanic which rewards juicing, giving you massive amounts of monsters to spawn massive amounts of Beyond portals, and that's what we wanted to target. We went to underground sea, we got all the pack size multipliers, and we went crazy. Now overall, we dropped a ton of tainted currencies. We got a lot of the common ones. So we dropped 95 whetstones, 89 armor scraps, 77 chromatics, 59 fusings, 12 mythics, 3 chaos orbs, and 70 jewelers over 100 maps. Now these are worth different amounts. So the whetstones and armor scraps, they're worth about half a chaos and 1 chaos respectively, if you have a reasonable amount of them. The chromatics are worth around 4C if you have an OK amount. Fusions are worth 10. Mythics right now, if you have a good amount, they're worth 45. I'd recommend holding on to them until you have at least 10 though, because the more you have, the more they're worth. The more you have, it's like really a massive multiplier. So definitely hang on to those. And then finally, the Chaos Orb, which is worth right now 67 Chaos. I have no idea why this is worth so much. People have said that you can use them on Rogue's Trinkets, corrupted items, which already have insane implicits, all sorts of stuff like that. I'm not 100% sure who's buying or why they're buying. I just know that they do buy them. We've tested that and we've seen that people do buy all this stuff at these prices. And then finally, we have Jewelers at 2C. Now, recently, the tainted currencies have received a buff, and we've waited a few days to see how that settles in. And these seem to be the prices that these currencies are going to stay at least for right now, unless everyone goes out and starts farming Beyond, which honestly they should be. So overall, that's kind of what pricing we're going to be using. So using these pricings, how much did we make in 100 underground seas using Beyond compasses without any of the Atlas passives allocated, I might add? Well, we made 1,906 chaos worth of currency. Now, right now, Beyond compasses are pretty expensive. On TFT, which is where I recommend buying the compasses with 4 charges, they go for about 30 to 20C. Sometimes you can get lucky and see some guy selling them cheaper, like 20C, 25C, but normally they're 30C. So we're going to be using that price for this experiment here and this results kind of tally. So overall, in 100 maps, that cost me 750C, and I made 1,906C in profit. So that's a pretty good return. If you actually want to know exactly how much we made, that is going to be a 1,156 chaos return on Beyond in 100 underground sea maps, which is pretty damn nice. I definitely think that's nothing to scoff at there. That's over, it's 11C per map, is it? pretty damn good for running Beyond. And on top of this, of course, Beyond still has all its regular juice. You're getting the normal items you can expect, more rares, more magic monsters. It's a great mechanic for just adding density to maps, which is a prized addition to any map by Path of Exile players. So you're basically paying for it and over doubling your money just off Tainted currencies and getting all the monsters for free. At current prices, I think if you're doing any kind of juice, Beyond is a no-brainer. It should be on every single one of your juiced up maps, and juices rejoice. It's definitely worth running. It's definitely good. All right, let's move on to the next thing here though. So some people were testing out Beyond and they were reporting that they weren't having very good results on lower density maps. You know, maps which weren't Underground Sea, which weren't mega juiced or didn't have any sort of insane stuff going on here. So let's take a look at that. So we got 48 Legion Dunes, which is basically a lower density strategy than this Underground Sea one that I was working around here. Now, obviously you can get far lower density strategies than this one, which you could really do Beyond in and see the difference in, but I wanted to do Legion Dunes, and we've got some pretty interesting results here. So I only ran 48 so far, I haven't run the full 100, but I wanted to get this video out so you guys could enjoy the Beyond goodness over the weekend. So we got some results here, and they're pretty compelling and pretty interesting. So far, in our test here, in 48 Legion Dunes, you can see we have 146 Tainted currencies total versus our 405 in Underground Sea. So we're definitely short a few Tainted currencies here. And my overall assessment here would be that we're getting less Beyond monsters and less Beyond bosses in Dunes due to the lower density. That seems like a pretty no-brainer. And it definitely has impacted our profitability somewhat. That's definitely going to be a fact. So if you're doing lower density, you're going to get less Beyond portals, less Beyond bosses, and less Tainted currency. So it's a mechanic that scales with density, like it always has. And that's going to really reward people investing in their maps and juicing to really get as much currency as possible. So the ideal scenario, it's clear because we've earned less in Dunes than in Underground Sea so far. Obviously variance plays a part, but I would say it's considerably less to the point where it's very noticeable. Density is king. If you can increase the density of your maps with Beyond on them, you will earn more Tainted currency and as a result multiply that value even further, which is really what you want to be doing and get even more currency and bang for your buck. All right. Next thing I want to talk a little bit about is going to be acquisition methods. So we've already talked about the compasses, which is definitely well worth it right now. You can see the return on investment, even in Dunes, has been very, very nice. So far in our 48 maps, we've got, a revenue of 677, which is, a pretty good return. That's almost double our money back already on the Dunes that we've ran with Beyond. So it's definitely still worth running. You get all the free monsters, you get the money back, you make money. It's a compass which is well worth its spot on your void stones. All right, let's talk a little bit about acquisition methods though. So there's two different avenues that you can go about getting Beyond. There's the compass, which is pretty damn good. Definitely well worth it right now at this 20 to 30C price point, 20C especially. But there's also hard rolling it on your maps. Now, the compasses give you 4 charges at now 30C right now, but using Alchemy Scours, it's going to cost you 9C to roll Beyond, which is, okay, pretty tedious, pretty annoying, but you can do it. Now, this is essentially going to be less worth it, but it will set an absolute floor of Beyond at 40C, which is basically 9C per map that you roll. Now, if you increase it to 40C, or well, technically right now it's 36C, you can see that even with Alcon going it, Alcon rolling it, or whatever you want, you're still making considerable amounts of money, which is pretty interesting, meaning Beyond is going to retain its position as the premier juicing mechanic and the premier profitability mechanic of multiplying your loot in maps. Now, obviously the Tainted currencies could go down in price and all sorts of stuff like that, but right now Beyond seems like an auto-include in every high-end strategy. Let's talk about some interesting findings here. Now, this is by no means concrete. It's completely anecdotal and also just based off a low sample size of 148 maps here. But let's talk a little bit about Tainted currencies. So when you're looking at Tainted currencies, they're kind of in a vacuum. They drop and they're only from Beyond, and you can very easily see how many are dropping of each different type. And you can actually start to construct a chance that you'll get each different currency. So I decided that I'd grab my 2 experiments here, 100 and 48 Dunes, and I'd see what percentage of my Tainted currencies were each types. And you can kind of see a very clear pattern here. It looks like the Chaos Orb is anywhere between 0.5 to 1% of all Tainted currencies you drop. The Mythic Orbs seem somewhere in the ballpark of 2% to 3% of the Tainted currencies you drop. So you should get, 3 Mythic Orbs or 2 Mythic Orbs every 100 Tainted currencies you drop. And then you can see the distribution of the others. And it seems quite consistent. Now, I didn't drop any of the Divine Teardrops or the Tainted Exalted Orbs. They obviously are exceptionally rare. But this definitely does seem quite interesting. And I think it's quite fun fun to see the results of this, meaning Beyond is not only a massive, awesome multiplier to your loot, and you can juice it up even more and do all sorts of stuff like that, but it's also very consistent. You're going to be getting the same amount of Tainted currencies over a large sample size of maps. As always, it's not a gamble. You will get money, and you will get what's on the tin, which is pretty damn good. So all of these maps will run without Atlas passives allocated though, because I was a little bit skeptical that any of the Atlas passives were really any good for Beyond. Let's take a little bit of a look at those though, and have a discussion, and then round out our discussion here. All right, so let's take a look. So first up, we got 3 different clusters which give you Beyond juice on the tree, and they're all on the left side. So the first one I want to talk about here is the Torn Veil cluster. So Torn Veil has the 2 very, very good travel nodes here of Beyond Portal chance. These essentially give you 30% more Beyond portals. Now, Beyond portals are essentially going to give you a higher chance to spawn Beyond monsters, which is insane. Now, in addition to that though, they also increase the chance to spawn the Beyond, which after it spawns will turn off all of the extra Beyond monsters, which are a substantial amount of your Tainted currency drops. Now, this isn't necessarily bad though, because these 2 Beyond nodes just accelerate your Beyond spawning kind of occurrences. So if you were going to spawn the boss early, you'll just spawn it early, but you'll still get the same amount of loot. It's not reducing the amount of Tainted currencies you'll get in any way. It's just accelerating them. And the reason this is good is that there are underground sea maps that I did where I didn't spawn the boss, and I could have got even more juice if I just had more monsters to the point where the boss would spawn. And it's these 2 nodes are going to make those maps far, far more rewarding, almost 30% more rewarding in fact, which is very, very enticing. If you take a look at the compass, I believe it does have a modifier on here, 25% increase Beyond demon pack size. So it's actually just a 30% more loot multiplier here on these Beyond portals. So if you're running Beyond, it is a no-brainer to pick up these 2 nodes if you're anywhere in the vicinity. So I would recommend absolutely taking these on every single Beyond build. It's absolutely insane. Definitely grab those. Now there's obviously this node here, Torn Veil. This should never be taken. It's awful. It's going to increase the chance to spawn the unique boss, which is never something you want to do. Absolutely never take this under any circumstances. I'd like to see this reworked because it's a terrible node. It's awful. All right, so next up we have this wheel here. Now these give you increased experience. You know, okay, that's not really very substantial, but then you also have Scent of Blood, 10% chance to attract Beyond demons in your maps. Now I've heard reports that this actually doesn't work and that it's bugged. Okay, we'll put that aside for right now. Let's talk a little bit about whether or not this is worth it. So 10% chance to spawn Beyond in your map. So if you take that and you actually take a look at that. So if you take this 1,906 chaos kind of return that we got here in Underground Sea, and you divide it by 10. So that's 190 C every 100 maps that you would get from taking this wheel. That's actually pretty substantial. If you're not speccing into Beyond, which I wasn't, and you just want to have a 4-point package here, which gives you 200 C every 100 maps you run on a high density map, it might actually be worth taking this. But you know, overall, I think that you'd much rather just invest in Beyond and have the compass, because that's going to give you substantially more anyway, because Beyond is that insane. So overall, again, I don't think this is a very good wheel. I think that it needs to be reworked. I don't think it's very interesting or very compelling as a Beyond enjoyer. Okay, so next up, we have Fiendish Opulence Wheel. So this is, again, another wheel where the notable is basically garbage. You really don't get that many rares anymore in your maps from Beyond, and even if you did get a ton of rares, you know, one basic currency item is not that substantial. You're not going to be getting an insane amount of anything from that, and I wouldn't even consider taking that even if I took these 3 nodes. Now, these 3 nodes are actually very, very substantial. So if you were to take these nodes here, that's a 15% more multiplier on the amount of Tainted currencies you're getting. Now, to kind of put this in perspective, let's do a little bit of math. So if we were to take the 1,906 chaos revenue here that we got and multiply that by 1.3, which is the Beyond portal stuff. That's 30% more Beyond portals. Now, obviously, it's not going to be exactly like this because there are maps where you spawn the boss, and for those maps, you're not actually getting 30% more loot. So we could probably take it down to a 1.5 because half the maps you spawn the boss, half the maps you might not. So I think that's probably a little bit more fair. You could even take it down even more if you wanted to, but this is just a little bit of a thought experiment here. So you take that, and then you're going to multiply that again by another 1.15 for the additional 15% chance to get the currency, which is, you know, pretty impressive. So you're getting massively amounts more in terms of your gains by taking these nodes here from your Beyond. So I think in the future, I may actually experiment with speccing into Beyond because it is just such a massive moneymaker in terms of what you can expect to get. And I think it's quite compelling. Now, overall, what is the verdict? Well, the Beyond, the laughing stock, the Reworked Beyond is actually a little bit profitable. In terms of that, I'm understating that, of course. It's insanely profitable. And I'd recommend it to anyone who wants to juice up their maps. As long as the tainted currencies don't go down in price too much, I think we're definitely well and truly in the clear. Beyond is looking great. It's looking very fun. It's very profitable if you want to go down that route. Make sure you maximize the amount of density to really take the most out of it. I think you can push it even further than I have in this experiment and make it even better. Now, overall, let's see what the price of the compass goes up to after this video, and let's see what the price of the actual tainted items go to after we, see everything in the dust settles and people start really farming this stuff. But overall, right now, it's looking very good. Don't be silly with the prices. Make sure you take a look at the economy and take a look at all the data and see if it's profitable for you. But I think it's definitely looking pretty promising, and it's another tool in our toolbox for making the game fun and making some currency. If you wanted to see any more of these tests live, we've got plenty more in the tank and plenty more to discover. Make sure you check out the streams, weekdays, times down below. And of course, if you're enjoying the content, make sure to keep watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Until then, cheers.